We're going to talk a little bit about some lore now. I got from werewolf to clinical lycanthropy. And just thinking about lycanthropes and people, like the actual people who think that they are werewolves. That's what we're going to talk about today. And in 1992, the psychiatrist Richard Noll, the man responsible for the term Renfield syndrome, published a collection of case studies titled Vampires, Werewolves, and Demons, 20th Century's Reports in the Psychiatric Literature. And we're going to look at several case studies from that book. And I would say, besides a trigger warning, because there's going to be some talk about bestiality and in general hardcore mental health challenges, these are real people, and it's really more just thinking about that this is the human condition and these are the challenges some people faced. And it's really interesting. And so with that in mind, we're going to talk about clinical lycanthropy. So in his introduction, Noll quotes from a clinical description of lycanthropy attributed to a 7th century physician named Paul of Aegina. I may say that sounds like a vagina, but Aegina, that sounds right? He was around 625 to 690 AD. And on lycanthropia, or on lycaon, those laboring under lycanthropia go out during the night imitating wolves in all things and lingering about sepulchres until morning. You may recognize such persons by their marks. They are pale, their vision feeble, their eyes dry, tongue very dry, and the flow of the saliva stopped. But they are thirsty, and their legs have incurable ulcerations from frequent falls. Such are the marks of this disease. You must know that lycanthropia is this, I don't know how to say that word. I'm just changing it every time. It's fine. So it's a species of melancholy. I do know how to say the word that is melancholy. So it is a species of melancholy, which you may cure at the time of the attack by opening a vein and abstracting blood to fainting and giving the patient a diet of wholesome food. Let him use baths of sweet water and then milk whey for 3 days and purging with the hyra from colocynth, which was some sacred drug from a gourd, twice or thrice. After the purgings, use the theriac of vipers and administers those mentioned for the cure of melancholy. When the disease is already formed, use soporific embrocations and rub the nostrils with opium when going to rest. Now, I think I found the solution to your sleeping problem, Diana.
Yeah,
I think if you just rub your nostrils with opium before you go to bed, I think you're going to you'll rest just fine.
There, I think you're right. I'll have to look into that one.
All right. But this definition, Noll pointed out, was the first time that lycanthropy was linked with melancholy or depression. Noll also discusses using the term zoanthropy instead of lycanthropy so that the diagnosis could include individuals who believed they were animals other than wolves. Because when we start talking about this, we're going to talk about some cases people think they're animals, but they're not necessarily wolves. And so this first case study was reprinted from the Canadian Psychiatric Association Journal in 1975. It was presented by the Chief of Psychiatry from the Veterans Administration Hospital, Lexington, Kentucky, and an associate professor from the Department of Psychiatry from the University of Kentucky. I have edited these studies to make them understandable and shorter because psychobabble is long. All right, case number 1, Mr. H. Mr. H was a 20-year-old single, unemployed white male from Appalachia. He was admitted with a history of prolonged and chronic drug abuse, including marijuana, amphetamines, psilocybin, and LSD. 10 months before, he had taken LSD with strychnine while in Europe with the U.S. Army. He was out in the woods, took the acid, then felt himself slowly turning into a werewolf, seeing fur growing on his hands and feeling it grow on his face. And he felt an urge to chase and eat live rabbits. He also felt that he'd obtained horrible insight into the devil's world. Keep note of that for future case studies. He took the feeding time on the mess hall sign as proof that others thought he was a wolf. The Army sent him to a psychiatrist who treated him with Thorazine for a few months. He returned to the U.S. and went to rehab for a few weeks. He came out abstaining from all drugs except marijuana. Then he went and saw The Exorcist 2 weeks before entering the hospital, and it fucked him up. He thought the devil came out of the screen and possessed moviegoers. There is a family history suggestive of mental disease, and an older brother and a maternal cousin were denied admission to the army because they were, quote, weird and nervous. Was this an actual army classification? Please tell me there was a weird and nervous a recruiter could check when they came in. Weird and nervous, not going in the army. Yep. So Mr. H started.
I hope so, actually. Sorry.
So Mr. H started doing hallucinogens in junior high. While in high school, he became interested in the occult and identified with a male priest who claimed to be a Satanist. Now, what fucking church are you going to? Because it sounds awesome, and I would like to attend that mass. But so he then joined the army, where his drug use escalated. He was discharged after 14 months and returned home, and reported being restless, hostile, agitated, anhedonic, which is a state of lacking pleasure or interest in activities, socially withdrawn, and unable to maintain steady work. He also believed that the devil had possessed the hospital staff. He felt his thoughts were being broadcast and that he had powers, including the ability to read minds and control dogs with his stare. The patient was treated with trifloperazine and showed gradual improvement. At the time of his discharge, 32 days after admission, he had dropped the belief that he was a werewolf or that he was possessed and displayed no other psychotic determinants. The patient was referred to an outpatient clinic near his hometown, 200 miles from this hospital. He was seen for an interview at that clinic 2 weeks after his discharge and appeared polite but guarded, was preoccupied with Satanism, and had stopped his medications because they made him feel uneasy. No further contact was established with his patient, and staff suspected he may have felt threatened by the clinic. Attempts to contact him for further visits were unsuccessful.
Huh.
Yeah. So that's case number one. And I said, like, that does not sound like a good time at all. And I really hope at some point somebody found that boy and he got some help.
Yes.
So case number two, a case of lycanthropy, which was originally printed in the American Journal of Psychiatry 1978, and the doctors were from the Hauser Clinic in Texas. So this patient was a 49-year-old married woman obsessed with wolves, like thought about them 24/7. 1 week before her admission, she got undressed and presented herself to her mother. This behavior lasted for 20 minutes. The next night, after sex with her husband, she growled, scratched, and gnawed at the bed. She stated that the devil came into her body and she became an animal. She also experienced auditory hallucinations, but there was no drug or alcohol involvement. Now, fuck this lady's husband. Why did he have sex with her? Like, clearly somebody is having an episode. The fact that
not well.
She is not having a good day, sir. So that was just my thought on that. That was the thing that I know the other part is horrific, but your husband sucks. So the hospital. So the patient was treated in a structured inpatient program. She was seen daily for individual psychotherapy and was placed on neuroleptic medication. During the first 3 weeks, she suffered relapses when she said such things as, "I am a wolf of the night. I am a wolf woman of the day. I have claws, teeth, fangs, hair, and anguish is my prey at night. The gnashing and snarling of teeth, powerless is my cause. I am what I am and will always roam the earth long after death. I will continue to search for perfection and salvation." She also expressed, and these are psychiatric journals from the 70s. So these are their wordings, not mine. So she experienced strong homosexual urges, almost irresistible zoophilia, which zoophilia refers to a paraphilia involving a sexual or romantic fixation on non-human animals. And it can include sexual acts, but they're saying basically she kind of got this sex drive to have that with wolves. And she started having masturbatory compulsions and then culminated the delusion of a wolf-like metamorphosis. She would gaze into the mirror and see the head of a wolf in place of a face on my own body. Just a long-nosed wolf with teeth, groaning, snarling, growling with fangs and claws, calling out, "I am the devil." Others around her noticed the unintelligible animal-like noises she made. So this is another person who, while they're having this delusion or whatever experience they're having, is also having the delusion about devils as well, which I think is interesting.
It is.
So by the fourth week, she had stabilized considerably, reporting and that when she looked in the mirror, the wolf eyes were gone. She had one short-lived relapse, which responded to reassurance by experienced personnel. And that episode occurred on the night of a full moon. And she wrote what she experienced. I don't intend to give up my search for what I lack in my present marriage. My search for such a hairy creature. I will haunt the graveyards for a tall, dark man that I intend to find. And girl, I mean, I kind of get it, right? I mean, I want to haunt graveyards for tall, dark men. So the hospital believed that the patient suffered from chronic pseudoneurotic schizophrenia. What is of particular interest is that the delusional material was organized about what they called a lycanthropic matrix. And they said that her symptom complex included the following classic symptoms. And they gave 5 classic symptoms. 1, delusions of werewolf transformation under extreme stress. 2, preoccupation with religious phenomenology, including feeling victimized by the evil eye. 3, a reference to obsessive need to frequent graveyards and woods. 4, primitive expression of aggressive and sexual urges in the form of bestiality. Or 5, physiological concomitants of acute anxiety. So interesting that those are things I see in all of these cases or across different people. So case number 3, and Lycanthropy Lives On, is from the British Journal of Psychiatry, and this is of 1975. So the patient GB was a 66-year-old widow living with an unrelated family member. For a week, she had become aggressive towards some members of the family for no apparent reason. She would get down on her hands and knees and bark like a dog. She had also been expressing paranoia fears about a plot being against her. She had full memory of acting like a dog, and she blamed this on the influence of the devil. She heard auditory hallucinations, which she thought were coming from evil spirits in the other half of the world. She presented signs of depression, including weight loss, poor appetite, and sleeplessness. She also feared her body was diseased and expressed a death wish, but denied suicide ideations. But she was fully oriented and her cognitive issues seemed to be intact. So she was aware of what was going on, but had all this other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so they said that lycanthropy is essentially a form of depersonalization, and the differential diagnosis must therefore include schizophrenia, manic depressive psychosis, hysterical neurosis, psychotic depression, and organic brain syndromes. And then they went on to say the symptom has been described for over 2,000 years. And in this age of rapidly changing psychiatric taxonomy, it must be one of the oldest in the history of psychiatry, which I think is interesting that diagnosis has really been around for thousands of years. All right. So our last one is case number 4. Lycanthropy Alive and Well in the 20th Century. And this is from Psychological Medicine, 1988. So these people came up with diagnostic criteria. And so they said clearly the belief that one has been transformed into an animal is central to the definition of lycanthropy. However, in their analysis, they wanted to allow for circumstances which the patient had an array of behavior. For example, barking, howling, crawling on all fours, things that were suggestive of an animal, but maybe they didn't specifically say, I am a dog, right? They were just acting like one. So they selected the following operational definition to include at least one of the following. 1, the individual reported verbally during intervals of lucidity or retrospectively that he or she was a particular animal. Or 2, the individual behaved in a manner reminiscent of a particular animal, for example, the howling or the growling. So with that criteria, they contacted the members of McLean Hospital and together with the residents and the nurses asked them to recall patients who had exhibited this. They actually came up with 13 leads, which upon review yielded 12 cases, which I feel like is a lot.
That seems like a lot.
It seems like a lot. I guess that also is like, so maybe this is not as rare as I seem to think it was, right? They did exclude one patient who was observed to have a cat-like gait, but did not believe himself to be a cat and exhibited no other behavior reminiscent of a cat or other animal. Sorry not to make light of this, but that is a hilarious thing to write in your journal.
He's a cat. So
He's going to kind of walk like a cat, but no, that's just the way Sam walks. So the results. Of the 12 patients, 8 met the DSM-3. This was 88. So this is before DSM-5. So 8 patients met DSM-3 criteria for bipolar disorder, 6 were manic, and 2 were depressed at the time of the episode. 2 had schizophrenia, 1 had borderline personality disorder, and 1 patient experiencing the chronic delusion that he was a cat received the diagnosis of atypical psychosis, although he'd experienced recurrent episodes of major depression in the past. 1 patient growled and contended that he was a Bengal tiger, and another patient whose mania was resolving said that he was a rabbit and hopped around the ward for a day. However, in these latter 2 cases, the patients admitted that such behavior was under the voluntary control. Each also admitted that he did not hold firmly to the belief that he was an animal, so thus they did not meet the criteria for this. So then they gave a case study of a 24-year-old single male presented to McLean Hospital with a history of recurrent major depression, a brief period of alcohol abuse, and the belief that he was a cat trapped inside a human body. The belief had persisted without interruption for 13 years. 13 years. The patient stated that he had known that he was a cat since the secret was imparted to him by the family cat, who subsequently taught him cat language. Very jealous. Though gamefully employed, the patient continued to spend virtually all of his spare time in feline activities. He lived with cats, had sexual activity with them. I don't know what that means. Don't want to think about it. Hunted with them and frequented cat night spots, which I hope is like a club for cats. So frequented cat night spots. I'm really picturing some cats having like a jazz club, you know?
Yes, exactly what I was thinking.
So he had a preference for the cat night spots to their human equivalents. So his greatest but unrequited love was for a tigress in a local zoo. He hoped one day to release her. The patient's lycanthropic delusions remained refractory to treatment with, and then they gave him a bunch of drugs, and then 6 years of insight-oriented psychotherapy. But I mean, he'd been thinking he was a cat for 13 years. It's going to take a lot of time to sort through. I think that's interesting, right? And so he thought he was a cat, but they're putting him under lycanthropy instead of zoanthropy. But the fact that this has been a diagnosis for thousands of years, and the number of people that were in this one case study from that hospital, like that makes it seem like there's maybe just a more common human condition.
Yeah.
Than one would think.
Yeah. Definitely.
So, and that's what Mary should have been thinking about when Asa asked her, "What is a werewolf?"
Is that what she should have imparted?
I think so.
Devil's Trap Podcast is a Don't Get It production. Meow.
Devil's Trap Podcast is part of the Ship It Studios podcast network. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Devil's Trap Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at Devil's Trap Podcast, Twitter at Devil's Trap Pod, or you can email us at devilstrap@devilstrappodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe, leave reviews, and share with all your friends. We're at all your favorite podcast outlets and at devilstrappodcast.com. I'm Babe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.